The morning sun spilled over the red brick chimneys of Marland Mansion, casting golden light across its manicured lawns. Inside its halls, quiet, regal, steeped in family memories, Leonard Grant returned home early, carrying a bouquet of tulips and a soft, boyish smile he hadn't worn in years. He didn't tell anyone. It was meant to be a surprise for his mother, Catherine, a small gesture to brighten her day. But just past the foyer, where the light hit the polished marble just right, time collapsed. His fiancée, Anne Graham, elegant, poised, the woman he had once pictured beside him for life, stood mid-motion, her stiletto heel raised high in fury. Below her, Catherine lay crumpled on the floor, her cane knocked aside, her arms trembling as she tried to push herself upright. Leonard froze. The tulips slipped from his fingers. They hit the floor soundlessly, softer than the scream building in his chest. Anne's voice sliced through the silence, cruel and venomous. "Why don't you just die already, you pathetic old hag?" The words didn't register at first. They floated above the marble, above the heartbreak, above the world Leonard thought he lived in. But when they landed, something inside him shattered. Leonard Grant had been betrayed before. In business, in boardrooms, even in the headlines. But nothing could have prepared him for this. This was not a rival. This was the woman he trusted to share his mother's home, his mother's heart. He had built his life from nothing. A Tulsa boy raised by a widowed nurse who worked night shifts and made miracles stretch between paychecks. At 39, Leonard was a billionaire by merit, not inheritance. And Catherine Grant had been there for every step of that rise. She was the reason, the root. And now she was on the ground, hurt, humiliated, by the very person he had brought into their lives. Anne spun around at the sound of his footsteps, her face drained of color, her mouth opened, but no lie could outrun the truth now. Leonard said nothing. Not at first. Just dropped to his knees, wrapped his arms around his mother, and held her like he did as a boy during storms, when he was small, and she was the unshakable one. Catherine wept. Not from the pain in her ribs, but from the devastation in her son's eyes, from the fact that she hadn't kept this from him well enough. And Anne, she began to plead. But Leonard was no longer listening. The illusion was dead, and so was any future that included her. What followed would upend not just their engagement, but Leonard's entire world. Because that moment, those fallen tulips that raised heel, marked the beginning of a transformation far deeper than heartbreak. But before we begin, if you believe that true love is measured by respect, kindness and second chances, not appearances or wealth, then please take a second to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything to us. It began, as most revolutions do, with the truth laid bare. And to understand why it hurt so much, you have to know where Leonard Grant came from. But in that moment, kneeling on the cold marble floor of Marland Mansion, his mother trembling in his arms, Leonard wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a tech mogul or a man of influence or someone people bowed to in boardrooms. He was just a son who had come home to find his world unraveling in the cruelest way imaginable. Catherine clung to him, her frail hands gripping the back of his jacket like she was afraid he might vanish. Her sobs were quiet, held in the way only mothers know how, to spare their children more pain. Leonard's mind raced, but his body stayed frozen. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, drowning out the sound of Anne's heels clicking toward them. "Leonard," she said, her voice suddenly soft. "This isn't what it looks like." He didn't look at her. Anne crouched beside them, her hand reaching toward his arm. She fell. I was trying to help her stand. You startled me, that's all." Catherine flinched when Anne got too close. That was all Leonard needed. "Don't," he said, his voice low and flat. "Don't touch her." Anne blinked, withdrawing her hand like it had been burned. "Leonard, baby, you're not seriously—" He looked at her then, just once. His eyes, usually warm, thoughtful, were empty, cold, like something vital had been drained from him. Anne's face twisted, trying to mirror concern. "You know how your mother gets when she's tired. She forgets things. Maybe she tripped and—" "Enough," he said. The word echoed. Catherine stirred weakly in his arms. "Leonard, sweetheart, don't be angry." She was crying again, but this time her voice was steadier. She looked up at him with pleading eyes. "It's all right. I'm okay." But it wasn't okay. And Leonard wasn't angry. Not exactly. He was broken. He stood slowly, helping Catherine to her feet. His hands were gentle, sure, but his posture, his silence, felt like a storm pulling in its winds. Anne hovered nearby, nervous now. "Please, we can talk about this. You don't want to make a scene. There's no reason to—" "Go to your room," Leonard said. Anne froze. "What?" "You heard me. Go upstairs. Pack your things. You're not staying here tonight." "Leonard, you're overreacting. This is insane." He didn't respond, just guided Catherine slowly toward the sitting room, one arm around her shoulders, his other hand gripping the cane she couldn't reach earlier. Anne stood rooted in place, panic creeping up her neck. "Are you seriously throwing me out over a misunderstanding?" Leonard paused in the doorway. Still without looking back, he said, "Don't speak to my mother again." The words landed like stone. Anne's breath hitched. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. She watched them disappear down the hallway, the quiet click of Catherine's cane the only sound left behind. The rest of the house stayed silent. That night, Leonard didn't return to his room. He didn't eat. He didn't speak to the staff, who had quickly learned not to ask questions. Instead, he stayed in the guest room adjacent to Catherine's, sat beside her as she lay beneath soft covers, one wrist bandaged from the fall, eyes still glassy with disbelief. "I'm sorry," she whispered, over and over. "I didn't want you to find out this way." Leonard didn't reply. He just held her hand, staring at the wallpaper as though it could explain any of this. Catherine turned her head toward him. "I didn't say anything because I thought maybe she'd grow out of it. Maybe if I loved her the way I love you, she'd soften. She didn't." "She hurt you," Leonard said quietly. "She hated that I had your heart before she did." He closed his eyes, and for a moment he wasn't sure he could open them again. Everything he had believed, the dinners, the laughter, the plans, they felt like shadows now, painted illusions, a house of glass already cracking before it shattered. He stayed by Catherine's side until her breathing slowed, until she drifted into sleep. Then he sat in the armchair across the room, staring out the window, the tulips still lying on the floor in the foyer where they had fallen. Outside, the wind swept softly across the grounds. Inside, a man who once had everything was quietly realizing what truly mattered, and what had almost been lost. It's easy to love the version of someone you meet under chandeliers. That's where Leonard first saw Anne Graham, beneath the glittering lights of a Dallas fundraiser for pediatric cancer research. She was standing beside the dessert table, dressed in emerald green silk, her laughter delicate as crystal. He was there on behalf of his foundation, half listening to speeches, more comfortable with spreadsheets than champagne flutes. But Anne, she moved through that room like she was born for it, confident, charming, and magnetic in a way that drew people in without even trying. Their first conversation was about foster care reform. She spoke with conviction and clarity, and Leonard, who rarely let anyone past his reserve, found himself staying long after the event had ended just to talk to her. It felt like fate, or something close. Within weeks, they were inseparable. She was attentive, thoughtful, full of warmth that made even Leonard's sharpest edges soften. For a man whose life had always been about control and precision, Anne was spontaneity, wrapped in elegance. He introduced her to colleagues, to friends, to the board of his non-profit. Everyone adored her. Everyone, except Catherine. From the beginning, she watched Anne carefully, not with hostility, but with the quiet caution of a woman who had weathered more storms than she cared to count. She never voiced her concerns outright, but she noticed the small things, like how Anne rarely asked about Leonard's upbringing unless it involved his achievements, how she seemed distracted when Catherine spoke about nursing or their life back in Tulsa, how she once accidentally served meat at a dinner after Catherine had mentioned her vegetarianism for health reasons. Anne brushed it off with a smile. "Oh, silly me, I must have forgotten." Catherine nodded politely, but she never forgot the look in Anne's eyes that night. Less apology, more performance. Still, Leonard was happy, and that mattered more than anything. He had spent most of his life building walls. Anne, it seemed, had found a way through them. She made him feel seen, celebrated. She said all the right things about family, community, faith. When she put her hand on his chest and said she wanted to grow old in Marland Mansion, raising children, hosting holidays, he believed her. He had no reason not to. At least, not then. But Anne hadn't grown up dreaming about love. She had grown up chasing status. Born to a father who measured affection in credit limits and a mother who spent more time at spas than at home, Anne learned early that image was everything. Her childhood was a showroom, beautiful, polished, hollow. She didn't want a partner. She wanted a future. And Leonard Grant, with his billion-dollar tech empire and his unguarded, grieving heart, looked like the perfect ticket. To the world, she was perfection. Behind closed doors, though, Catherine saw the mask slip. When Leonard left for business trips, Anne barely pretended anymore. Her patience thinned, her smiles faded. She dismissed Catherine's stories mid-sentence, ignored her requests for help. Once, during a winter storm that knocked out power for half a day, Anne lit candles, but only in her own suite. Catherine was left to fumble through the dark alone. "She doesn't like me," Anne once said casually to a friend on the phone, not realizing Catherine was within earshot. "She's jealous, always hovering like I'm stealing her little boy." Catherine never repeated it to Leonard. She told herself it wasn't her place, that he needed this, needed someone. She'd survived worse, after all. And perhaps Anne would soften with time. People grow into their roles, don't they? But kindness can't be forced. And cruelty, no matter how well hidden, has a way of seeping through the cracks. Anne perfected the art of public grace and private disdain. She baked cookies with Catherine when Leonard was around, took selfies with her for charity galas. But when no one was watching, her tone turned sharp, her help disappeared. More than once, she forgot Catherine's medication refills only to laugh it off later. And Leonard, he was blind, not from ignorance, but from hope. He wanted to believe so badly that this was the woman who would love him without agenda, that the life they were building was real. He missed the subtle shifts, the quiet cruelty, the forced smiles that didn't quite reach Anne's eyes when Catherine walked into the room. Looking back now, every memory had begun to feel like a lie, wearing expensive perfume. He remembered the time Anne insisted on redecorating the East Wing without asking Catherine first. When his mother voiced her discomfort, Anne claimed she'd simply misunderstood. Leonard took Anne's side. He remembered when Anne started calling Catherine by her first name instead of Mrs. Grant, a small thing, but always with a forced sweetness that grated. "Catherine," she'd sing as if addressing a pet. Leonard had smiled at the time. He thought it meant they were getting closer. Now he knew better. The truth, when it comes, doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers for years before finally being heard. Now, with the illusion shattered, Leonard sat in the stillness of his guilt, haunted by all the signs he hadn't seen, or hadn't wanted to. His love for Anne hadn't been foolish, but it had been blind. And in that blindness, his mother had suffered. The image of Catherine on the marble floor would never leave him. Neither would the truth. The life he thought he was building had been a house of cards, and Anne had been smiling the whole time she stacked it, and now it was all coming down. The news broke on a Tuesday morning. It started with a single headline on a gossip blog, barely sourced, likely a guess. Leonard Grant and Anne Graham call off wedding. Within hours, it was everywhere. Magazines that once celebrated their love story with glossy covers now ran pieces dissecting their silence. Fashion influencers speculated about dress fittings suddenly cancelled. Society columns whispered about a fight, a scandal, a secret. Leonard said nothing, not to the press, not to the board, not even to his closest friends. But Anne, Anne made noise. She showed up unannounced at the mansion 2 days after she'd been asked to leave. Security turned her away. She cried at the gate, called his office, left voicemails that teetered between desperate and defiant. "Leonard, please, we need to talk." Then, "I know this looks bad, but you know me. You know me." Then, quieter, "Don't let your mother come between us." And finally, "If you don't call me back, I swear to God I'll tell them everything. You're not the saint they think you are." Leonard listened to none of them. He didn't need to. He had seen enough. But he did agree to see her once more, on neutral ground, in a quiet suite at the Fairmont Hotel downtown. No lawyers, no entourage, just the two of them. She arrived looking polished, grief curated like a fashion choice. Her makeup was dewy, her eyes red-rimmed in a way that suggested tissue dabbing, not sobbing. She wore the bracelet he bought her last Christmas, the one she'd once claimed wasn't really her style. "Leonard," she began, stepping forward. He didn't move. She faltered. "I don't know what she told you, but this isn't fair. You're punishing me for a misunderstanding." He sat calmly, his posture perfect, his face unreadable. On the coffee table between them sat a small black velvet box. Anne stared at it. Then at him. "This is it?" she asked. "After everything?" Leonard nodded once. "Yes." Her eyes widened. "You're seriously giving up on us because of her?" "No," he said. "I'm giving up on the version of you I thought was real." Anne's breath caught. "You're making a mistake. You think anyone else will love you the way I did? Look at what we had, look at what we built." "We built nothing," he said quietly. "I built a dream. You moved into it." Silence stretched. Anne's lip trembled, but the tears didn't come. "Leonard," she whispered, softer now, "I love you." "No, you loved the life," he replied. "And I loved the lie." He pushed the box across the table. "You should have it. I don't want it back." She stared down at the ring, the one she'd once posted on Instagram with a caption about forever, and for a moment her mask cracked. But only for a moment. "You'll regret this," she hissed, standing suddenly. "You think the world's going to applaud you for dumping me? For siding with some washed-up old nurse over your own future?" Leonard looked up at her then, his gaze steady. "My mother raised me on integrity. You can't buy that. You sure as hell can't fake it." She didn't respond, just stormed out, heels clicking like thunder. That evening, Leonard issued a statement to the press. He stood at a small podium in the garden of Marland Mansion, cameras flashing like lightning as reporters jostled for sound bites. He didn't wear a tie. His suit was simple, his voice steady. "Out of respect for those involved, I won't be sharing the details of the broken engagement," he began. "I ask for privacy for myself and my family, but I do want to say this." He paused. "My mother, Catherine Grant, is the strongest person I know. Anyone who knows her knows the kind of heart she has. She has my full love and support now and always." He didn't name Anne. He didn't need to. The message was clear. The next day, he cleared his calendar. No galas, no tech expos, no boardroom appearances or interviews. He began working from home, conducting quiet reviews of his company's internal policies, especially those related to elder care, employee support, and family leave. He didn't disappear, but he withdrew. The man who once flew coast to coast weekly now spent his mornings in the garden with Catherine, helping her water her roses. They sat under the pergola with tea and talked about Tulsa, about his childhood, about how silence sometimes carries more power than headlines. When reporters called, he didn't answer. When colleagues asked questions, he said only, "I'm focusing inward right now." Behind the scenes, he was restructuring his foundation, directing more funding toward elder wellness initiatives. He began researching quiet ways to support caregivers, not just the elderly, but the people who keep them going when no one else is watching. There was no victory parade, no revenge, just distance, grace, and the slow, quiet work of rebuilding what mattered most. Because when trust is broken, the best thing a man can do isn't shout about it. It's become someone worth trusting again. Guilt doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in slowly like fog rolling through familiar streets, turning everything you once knew into a question. In the days following the press conference, Leonard found himself waking before the sunrise, not out of obligation but from something he couldn't name, some weight pressing on his chest, a silence too loud to ignore. He would sit at the edge of his bed, the mansion quiet around him, staring out the window toward the east lawn, where his mother used to walk before her hips began to fail her. The tulips he had once brought home had long since wilted, their petals pressed between the pages of a book he couldn't bring himself to open. Most mornings he found her in the garden, Catherine wrapped in a cardigan, her grey hair pinned back loosely, hands buried in the soil, like it was the only thing that made sense anymore. She never brought up Anne, not directly. But one morning, as they sat beneath the climbing wisteria, Leonard asked softly, "How long?" Catherine didn't look up. She ran her fingers over a sprouting lavender stem, her expression unreadable. "A while," she said. "A few months. Maybe more." Leonard swallowed. "And you didn't say anything?" She finally met his gaze. Her eyes, though tired, held no bitterness. "You loved her," she said gently. "And I didn't want to be the reason that love cracked." Leonard looked down at his hands. "She could have hurt you worse. I let her into our home. I gave her access to you, and I didn't see it." "You weren't supposed to," she said. "That was never your burden." But it was. He felt it in his bones. Later that evening he sat alone in his study. The room was warm, lit by the fireplace, but he couldn't feel any of it. On the desk in front of him sat a fresh, leather-bound journal, blank pages waiting for something real. He opened to the first and wrote only 3 words. "How didn't I know?" He journaled like that every night. Short sentences, questions with no answers, lists of memories that now felt like illusions. He wrote about Anne's laugh, about how she folded her napkin like his mother used to, about the way he excused her indifference as independence, about how he mistook politeness for patience, and deeper still, he wrote about himself. About the boy who grew up in a small Tulsa apartment, watching his mother cry behind the bathroom door and pretend she was fine the next morning. About the man who spent his life building enough success to ensure she'd never suffer again, and still failed to protect her when it mattered most. He stopped going to corporate meetings entirely. He left the suits hanging in his closet and started wearing old flannel again, shirts he hadn't touched in years. He spent afternoons driving around the back roads of Ponca City in his pickup truck, windows down, mind blank. Sometimes he'd stop at the diner on Main Street where he and Catherine used to split cherry pie when money was tight. The waitress still remembered his name. "You okay, Mr. Grant?" she asked one day. He smiled politely, trying to be. But the truth was messier. He was grieving, not just the loss of Anne, but the part of himself that had trusted so blindly, the part that thought love could be built purely on admiration and appearances. He'd spent years defining success by expansion, by market value, by the applause of a world that knew his name but not his story. Now, all of that felt hollow. It wasn't until one quiet evening, sitting beside Catherine as she finished a puzzle in the sunroom, that he finally voiced it. "I thought I had everything figured out," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Catherine didn't answer immediately. She placed a piece of sky into the corner, then looked over at him. "Leonard," she said softly, "do you remember what you told me when you got your first check from the company?" He blinked. "I said I was going to buy you a car." She smiled. "You said you were going to take care of me, that it was finally my turn to rest." He lowered his head. "I never needed a mansion," she continued, "or a ring, or even a car. I just needed my son to come home. And you did. When it counted." He closed his eyes. The weight of her words landed heavy, and somehow, gently. In that moment, he realized something simple, something profound. He couldn't change the past, but he could build a future not out of guilt, but out of truth. The next morning, he opened his journal again. This time, he didn't write about Anne. He wrote about Catherine's hands, calloused from years of nursing, about the way she hummed when she folded laundry, about the quiet strength of someone who endured pain not because she had to, but because she chose love over resentment. And from that place, something inside Leonard began to shift. The grief remained, the guilt didn't vanish, but beneath them something new was beginning to grow, not just healing, purpose, and maybe, for the first time in a long time, peace. Some transformations don't come with grand gestures. They begin in silence, in early mornings, in slow steps, in quiet decisions made with steady hands. For Leonard Grant, change began the day he cleared his corporate calendar. He didn't sell his companies. He didn't vanish into the wind or make some dramatic declaration. Instead, he walked into the boardroom of his flagship tech firm, placed a single sheet of paper on the table, and announced, "From this point forward, I'm reallocating 70% of my time and resources to a new mission." No one argued. They had seen the shift in him. He still wore the title of CEO, but something deeper had taken the wheel. That something had a name: Catherine. In the months that followed, Leonard launched the Catherine Grant Foundation, a non-profit devoted entirely to elder care, elder rights, and the fight against silent abuse inside homes that looked perfect from the outside. The mission was personal, raw and clear. No one's mother, father, aunt or grandparent should suffer alone in a house full of whispers and neglect. Not if he could help it. At first, people were surprised. Billionaires rarely pivot. But Leonard didn't need applause, he needed action. And this time the return he was after wasn't profit, it was protection. The foundation started small, a single hotline for anonymous elder abuse reports in Oklahoma. Then came mobile response units, nurses, caseworkers, legal support, available for in-home assessments, no red tape. The cornerstone, though, was the Catherine Home Companion Program, a comprehensive training initiative for home care professionals. It taught more than just medical protocol. It taught empathy, communication, dignity. Leonard personally funded full scholarships for hundreds of students, most of them single mothers, veterans, and people who'd cared for relatives with little to no formal training. The motto of the program was simple: care that sees, not just serves. And every graduate left with a pin in the shape of a tulip. Word spread fast. Not because Leonard sought attention, but because the work spoke louder than press releases. Families reached out from all across the state. Some shared stories of neglect, others simply thanked him for starting something others hadn't dared to. But while his foundation grew, Leonard himself was shrinking back into something truer. He moved most of his operations out of the corporate tower in Dallas and back to Ponca City. He traded keynotes for local roundtables. He walked to the farmers' market on Saturdays, nodded to strangers at the bakery, held the door open for teachers and retired postmasters who didn't care how many zeros were in his net worth. He began calling up old friends from college, reaching out to mentors he'd lost touch with, sitting down with former classmates over coffee, not because he needed anything, but because he was learning how to live again without the armor of ambition. In the evenings he'd come home, change into jeans and a hoodie, and help his mother in the garden. Catherine was healing, slowly but surely. Her ribs mended. Her voice grew stronger. But what changed most was the way her smile returned. Not the one she wore for the world, but the one Leonard remembered from childhood. The one she used when dancing barefoot in the kitchen or humming off-key to country songs on the radio. One afternoon, as the sun filtered through the pergola, Leonard caught her humming again. He looked up from trimming the hedge and saw her kneeling beside the rosemary bush, laughing softly at something the neighbor's dog had done. It hit him all at once, how close he'd come to losing that, to letting it be stolen by someone who never deserved to stand in her presence. Later that night, Catherine found a gift on her pillow. It was a small engraved plaque that read, "You taught me how to build a life. Now I'll spend mine building better ones for others." She didn't say anything, just placed it gently on her nightstand and whispered, "That's my boy." Leonard began journaling again, but now his pages held something different. He wrote about progress, about the elderly man who had called the foundation to report his daughter's boyfriend stealing his medication, and how the team helped relocate him to a safe home. About a 22-year-old graduate from the Companion program who had started her own local caregiving agency. About the smiles, the letters, the peace. Success, he now realized, wasn't in headlines or valuations. It was in the way someone's voice changed when they knew they were safe. In the way his mother slept soundly again. In the way his own heart, once broken, now beat with purpose. He had lost a fiancée. He had lost illusions. But what he found was something far more rare. A new reason to rise in the morning, and a mission worth more than gold. Anne Graham was used to being photographed. She knew her angles, knew how to hold a gaze just long enough to look engaged, warm, desirable. For nearly a year, her image had been everywhere, from charity galas in Dallas to luxury lifestyle spreads in glossy magazines. She was the fiancée of Leonard Grant, and in that world, she had been untouchable. Until she wasn't. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It came in cracks. First, a cancelled invite to a high-profile wedding, then a lukewarm response from her PR agent when Anne tried to schedule a comeback interview. "Let's just give it a few weeks," the woman had said gently. "Let the air clear." But the air never cleared, because while Leonard chose silence, the internet did not. It began with a simple tweet, 7 words from an anonymous account. "Ask the house staff what really happened." By the next morning, screenshots were circulating. A former housekeeper from Marland Mansion, who had signed an NDA long expired, posted a detailed thread describing Anne's true nature. How she would berate Catherine for being slow. How she demanded staff ignore her mother-in-law-to-be. How she once mocked Catherine's mobility issues while sipping champagne. She wasn't just cold, one post read. She was cruel behind closed doors. The story caught fire. Within 48 hours, a viral exposé ran on a digital investigative site, complete with testimonies, blurred video snippets from internal security footage, and statements from multiple former employees. None of them named Leonard directly. They didn't have to. The truth, once hidden behind manicured smiles and designer heels, was now on full display. Brands that once collaborated with Anne ghosted her. Sponsorship deals evaporated. Her inbox, once filled with invitations and influencer packages, now sat quiet, except for the interview requests she didn't want to answer. She tried, at first, to control the narrative. She posted a tearful Instagram video, framed by soft lighting and gentle piano music. She wore no makeup. Her voice shook as she spoke about being misunderstood, about the dangers of internet witch hunts, and how Leonard and I simply had different visions for our future. It was theatrical and completely ineffective. The comments were brutal. Few bought the performance. Most saw right through it. "You didn't just lose Leonard," one user wrote. "You lost the mask." Desperate, she pivoted. Anne tried to rebrand as a mental health advocate, posting about healing and journaling and growth. She launched a podcast, The Other Side of Glamour, but it never cracked the charts. The sponsors were gone. The listeners never showed up. The world that had once worshipped her perfection now wanted nothing to do with her. Behind closed doors, Anne spiraled. She moved out of her high-rise condo after falling behind on payments. Friends stopped responding to her texts. Even the ones who had once defended her in group chats began to quietly distance themselves. Not because Leonard had turned them away, but because they'd finally seen who she really was. She tried reaching out to him once. Just one message. "I'm sorry." He never replied, because Leonard had already let her go. He wasn't following her downfall. He wasn't tracking the exposés or reading the tweets. He had too much life in front of him to waste another breath on what had already rotted. While Anne clung to fading influence, Leonard was opening new wings of the Catherine Grant Foundation. While Anne recorded videos in dimly lit rooms, Leonard was speaking at senior centers, offering hugs to caregivers who cried in his arms. While Anne searched for redemption in a broken mirror, Leonard wasn't looking back. She had built her life on borrowed identity, on proximity to a man she never truly loved, only leveraged. And when that scaffolding was pulled away, all that remained was what she had always feared, herself. Not the curated self, the real one. And now the world knew her too. No rebrand could change that. No apology could erase it. In the end, Anne wasn't destroyed by Leonard. She was destroyed by the choices she thought no one would ever see. And while Leonard moved forward, heart heavier but soul clearer, Anne stood still in the ruins of a life built on lies. Love, when it returns after betrayal, doesn't arrive loud or lavish. It shows up gently, without pretense, without performance, just presence. Leonard met her on a sun-drenched Thursday afternoon. The Catherine Grant Foundation was hosting its first statewide caregiver appreciation event. Local volunteers, nurses, and home aides gathered beneath a white canopy, strung with paper lanterns. There were folding chairs, lemonade pitchers, and laughter that felt easy, not performative or polished, just real. She was standing by the sign-in table, helping one of the elderly guests clip a name badge to her cardigan. Her voice was soft, her touch light, her smile sincere. Her name was Eva Morales. She wasn't from money. She wasn't part of any elite circle or Forbes list. She was a community nurse from Stillwater, raised by her grandmother and fiercely proud of it. She'd joined the foundation as a volunteer months earlier, but this was the first time Leonard had really seen her. Not just noticed her, seen her. She didn't know who he was at first, or maybe she did, and just didn't make a show of it. Either way, it was refreshing. She asked him questions that weren't about stocks or headlines. She asked about Catherine, about what inspired the foundation, about whether he preferred tea or coffee on cold mornings. And Leonard, who had spent most of his life being studied like a headline, found himself wanting to answer. They talked again the following week, then again the week after that, and over time something began to grow between them, not fireworks, not obsession, but something steadier, calmer, a current beneath the surface, the kind of love built more on listening than longing. Eva didn't ask for anything. She never tried to impress him. She simply showed up, present, honest, curious. She shared stories about her patients, her upbringing, the way she and her grandmother used to press flowers in books just to remember the shape of a season. One afternoon, after helping replant the herb garden with Catherine, she stayed for tea. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the veranda. Catherine watched her with quiet interest, then leaned over to Leonard when Eva excused herself to wash her hands. "She's kind," Catherine said. Leonard smiled. "She is. And she doesn't walk around like she's owed something." He chuckled. "No, she just walks." Catherine's eyes softened. "Good. You deserve someone who walks beside you, not ahead of you, or behind." That night, Leonard stood at the window of the guest room, no longer needed for worry or watchfulness, and watched Eva's car pull away down the drive. The taillights faded into the dusk, but something warm lingered. Hope. He hadn't realized how long he'd been holding his breath until he finally exhaled. Their relationship moved slowly. They didn't rush into declarations or labels. They spent time in the garden, walked through the community together, shared quiet meals without pressure to entertain or perform. Eva asked about Anne only once. Leonard told her the truth, without drama, without bitterness. And Eva simply nodded, then reached across the table and held his hand, not out of pity, but because she knew what it meant to love someone through their healing. Catherine took to Eva more and more. They baked together, played dominoes, swapped stories about strong-willed sons and stubborn recipes. The mansion, once echoing with tension and unspoken grief, began to fill with laughter again, the kind that spills from the soul. Even the rooms Anne had once redecorated with cold perfection began to change. Leonard had them repainted, not with opulence, but with comfort. Soft earth tones, family photos, a reading nook with warm throws and shelves lined with novels Catherine loved, and Eva kept sneaking onto his list. Marlin Mansion was no longer a stage for appearances. It was becoming a home again, not just for Leonard and Catherine, but for a growing circle of friends, neighbors, and foundation staff who began gathering for weekly dinners and Sunday afternoon teas. There were no scripts, no masks, just people, flawed, kind, real. And Leonard, once guarded by necessity, began to let them in. He found himself laughing more, sleeping better, waking up not to strategy meetings, but to the sound of his mother humming in the kitchen and Eva making coffee just the way he liked it, strong with a splash of oat milk. He still journaled, but now the pages held fewer questions and more gratitude, fewer regrets, more roots. Because sometimes love isn't about the passion that consumes, it's about the presence that remains. And in the heart of the mansion where betrayal once broke him, Leonard Grant found something far rarer than wealth or headlines. He found peace, and the kind of love that grows only where truth is allowed to bloom. Time has a way of polishing pain into wisdom, if you let it. For Leonard Grant, the journey from heartbreak to healing didn't follow a straight line. It moved in quiet waves, forward, then back, then forward again, each step less about rebuilding the life he'd lost, and more about reimagining the life he wanted to lead. It had been over a year since that day in the foyer, when tulips hit the floor and illusions shattered. Since then, everything had changed, not in headlines or viral posts, but in the way Leonard carried himself, in the way he showed up, not just for the world, but for the people who mattered most. He was no longer just a billionaire. He was a protector, a son, a man of purpose. The Catherine Grant Foundation had expanded far beyond what Leonard first envisioned. What began as a localized effort to safeguard elders in Oklahoma was now a national network of care, fully staffed, fully funded, and fully focused on one mission: dignity in aging. There were now satellite offices in 12 states, emergency teams, grant-funded respite programs, legal resources for families caught in quiet battles, scholarships for aspiring caregivers, and at the heart of it all stood Catherine, once a silent sufferer, now a voice heard across the country. She'd become the face of the Foundation's public campaign, seen, heard, safe. Her photo, smiling gently, eyes steady, graced posters, newsletters, and speaking events from California to Connecticut. When she spoke at the National Council on Aging, her voice was calm. "We don't get weaker with age," she told the crowd. "We just need someone to remember we matter, and that someone should always start at home." The standing ovation lasted nearly 3 minutes. Leonard watched from the wings, tears pricking the corners of his eyes, not from sadness but from awe. This was his mother, and now she was everyone's reminder of what strength truly looked like. Back at Marland Mansion, life had settled into something beautiful, not perfect, but full. Eva had become part of the rhythm. Some days she helped with foundation outreach, other days she simply sat with Catherine on the porch swapping recipes and laughter. Leonard still worked, of course he did, but his work no longer revolved around margins or markets. It revolved around moments, like the letter he received from a 17-year-old caregiver in Montana who said the Catherine Grant Scholarship saved her life, or the voicemail from an elderly man in Michigan, crying as he thanked Leonard for sending someone who listened, not just logged data. Success for Leonard was no longer measured in dollars. It lived in quiet victories, in dignity restored, in the way his mother smiled without flinching, in the warmth that had returned to the mansion's once haunted walls. One morning, as the sky shifted from violet to gold, Leonard and Catherine sat on the balcony that overlooked the eastern lawn. The tea between them steamed in matching porcelain cups, lavender blend just the way Catherine liked it. They said nothing for a while, just watched the horizon. And then Leonard spoke. "I thought I lost everything that day," he said quietly, his voice low, steady. Catherine didn't look at him. She just reached over, laid her hand gently over his, and replied, "You found everything that matters." The breeze moved softly around them, not rushing, just passing through. And for the first time in a long time, Leonard felt whole, not because of what he'd regained, but because of what he had chosen to protect: love, integrity, family, legacy, not written in stone or in wealth, but in the hearts touched by his mother's strength and his decision to honor it. And that, he knew, was a life worth building, a life truly rich.